Why is there hatred against us there? George Bush's famous question. Well, everyone knows the answer to this. A couple of days after I have to distinguish two things here. There's a category of people called intellectuals. Their task is to make up fabrications that protect power and divert attention from what's obvious and indoctrinate people and so on. And they've concocted all sorts of complicated stories about globalization and, failure to enter the modern world and this, that, and the other thing. Okay, and they envy us because we're so wonderful, et cetera, et cetera. All right, we can put all that aside. That's standard propaganda. Let's talk about what is plainly the case and is in fact discussed by serious people, like, say, the Wall Street Journal. So a few days after the September 11th, the Wall Street Journal, to its credit, began running serious stories in which they investigated opinions of people in the Islamic world who they're interested in, what they called moneyed Muslims, the ones with, the rich ones, the important ones. So bankers, international lawyers, directors of multinational corporations, people who are right inside the U.S. system, who certainly have no opposition to what's called globalization. In fact, they're part of it, who certainly hate bin Laden because he's trying to kill them, but who nevertheless agree with much of what he says. And what they say is, their opinions are that the United States supports brutal and corrupt regimes which block democracy and modernization and development. They oppose particular policies like the decisive U.S. support for the 35-year military occupation of Palestinian territory, which has been harsh and brutal and relies crucially on U.S. military and diplomatic support. When you read in the newspapers that Israeli helicopters and jets are attacking Palestinians, that's total fabrication. U.S. jets and U.S. helicopters, which happen to be piloted by Israeli pilots, are attacking those concentrations. That's what ought to be said. Israel doesn't manufacture helicopters or F-16s, and they understand all that. They know that the U.S. has been blocking any diplomatic settlement for 30 years, since Sadat offered one in 1971. It's not reported here, and in the West it's not talked about much, but they know it. And they know what's going on there. They also know perfectly well that the U.S. and Britain are carrying out operations against Iraq, which are devastating the civilian society and strengthening Saddam Hussein. And they also remember, as Westerners like to forget, that the U.S. has and Britain and France and Holland and so on have no objection to Saddam Hussein's crimes. We know that for sure, because they supported Saddam Hussein right through the period of his worst crimes. Gassing the Kurds, Anfal, chemical weapons. They continued to support him very happily. He remained a good, favored friend and ally of the West, which helped provide him with the means for developing weapons of mass destruction when he was really dangerous. So they listened when Tony Blair and Madeleine Albright condemned Saddam because, the ultimate monster even gassed his own people. They listen, but they add the words that are excluded in the West. They say, yeah, he committed those crimes with your support. Okay, rather crucial omission, which you never hear from Tony Blair and the rest. But they are not that indoctrinated, so they remember those elementary truths. And those are other reasons why, if you want, there's hatred against us. Furthermore, there's absolutely nothing new about this. Anybody who wants to understand any of it knows exactly where to go. You go to the declassified U.S. record. U.S. is a very open society. We have declassified records of internal deliberations from the past. All these questions came up decades ago. So and had the same answers. In 1958, crucial year for many reasons. I'm now talking about internal records. The U.S., so the Eisenhower administration, discussed three major crises for the United States. One was Indonesia, one was North Africa, third was the Middle East. All Islamic countries, all oil producers. The question arose whether the Russians were involved. That was dismissed as ludicrous, no Russian involvement. It's just independent nationalism in the three countries, which was the main crisis. Then Eisenhower pointed out, with regard to the Middle East, in his words approximately, he said there is a campaign of hatred against us, not by the governments, but by the people. And that was an issue that was discussed. No globalization, no, they hate us because we have McDonald's and none of this stuff. Why is there a campaign of hatred against us? Well, the National Security Council discussed it. That's the highest analysis and planning body. And they said the problem is that there's a perception among the people of the region that the United States supports corrupt and harsh regimes which prevent democratization and development, and does so because of its interest in controlling Near East oil. And they said it's hard to counter this perception because it's true. And furthermore, it should be true, because we should support those regimes in order to maintain our control over Near East oil. So therefore, there is a campaign of hatred against us by the people who see that we're robbing their resources and preventing democracy and development. But, we can't do much about it because that's what we ought to be doing. Well, like I say, no McDonald's, no envying us our magnificence, no globalization, just perfectly obvious things. The same reason why there was a campaign of hatred against England from the people of India, or against Holland from the people of the East Indies, and so on and so forth. Yeah, you crush people under your boot, they don't like it. So there's a campaign of hatred against you. In fact, what they were discussing internally in 1958 is the same as what the Wall Street Journal found in 2001, and for the same reasons, because the policies haven't fundamentally changed. So we understand. The Wall Street Journal only was concerned with elite opinion. If they'd gone down to the slums of Cairo, they would have gotten stronger opinions, but of the same kind, and more different ones also. Because in the slums of Cairo, they wouldn't like the fact that the wealth of the region is going to the West and not to the people of the region. The ones who the Wall Street Journal was talking about are quite happy about that, because they're part of the ruling elite and they enrich themselves while the resources go to the West. So they're part of the imperial system. So you get different opinions if you bother to ask people in the so-called streets. But fundamentally, it's the same. So there's a so bin Laden's messages certainly resonate, and people agree with a lot of the things he's saying. About 80% of Egyptians, for example, say that the most important issue to them is the crushing of the Palestinians. So when they hear bin Laden say it, they agree. It has nothing to do with whether they like him or hate him. On the other hand, there is a clique of radical Islamists who were organized and trained and brought together by Western intelligence for their own purposes, and have continued to do for 20 years just what they've always said they were going to do. So while some things are obscure, I don't think these are obscure. I think the answers are quite transparent.